The day Ethan proposed to me, his so-called sister sent me a video. In the video, Ethan was drunk, leaning against her like an abandoned kitten, clinging to her neck and demanding kisses. His voice was a soft murmur, calling her sister, a side of him I had never seen before. He marries you for the family alliance, he loves me because we have faced life and death together. So what do you have to compete with me? Their story was like a tale of redemption. A girl descended from the heavens, saving a boy abandoned by the world. Later, the boy became successful, and she suddenly disappeared. Then I met Ethan at a cocktail party, where he said my eyes were beautiful, like the stars in the sky. We got to know each other and fell in love. But just before our wedding, that girl suddenly returned. Ethan had promised to take me to see wedding dresses. When the time came, however, I couldn't reach him on the phone. I was terrified something had happened to him. This impulsive man, who acted recklessly, struggled with untreated bipolar disorder. Even though he tried hard to control it, I still worried he might lose control and hurt himself. I called him numerous times, but he didn't pick up. It was past midnight when I was about to go out to look for him, and then Ethan called me. I quickly answered, "Ethan, are you okay?" "Don't worry, he's fine," a girl's voice interrupted me directly. It was soft and soothing, like a lullaby, but it struck me like a bolt of lightning. I knew who she was. And because I knew, I was at a loss for how to respond. Given my relationship with Ethan, I should have followed his lead and called her sister. But I couldn't say it. That title held special meaning for them. Perhaps sensing my unease, Faith added, "Ethan just had a bipolar episode, and he threw his phone on the ground, so he didn't hear your calls." "He had another episode?" I was very worried and quickly took out the medicine box. All his bipolar medications were stored here, so I had to get the medicine to him right away. "Where are you?" "I'm coming over now." Hearing my words, Faith suddenly laughed on the other end of the line. She casually said 3 words, "No need for medicine." But I had seen Ethan during his bipolar episodes. In agony, he didn't want to hurt anyone, but he couldn't help but engage in self-harm. He had dozens of scars on his body now. All were self-inflicted when Ethan was trying to calm down during his manic episodes. So I couldn't help but say, if Ethan doesn't take his medicine, he could very well hurt himself. His arms are covered in scars, and he doesn't have much healthy skin left. He can't hurt himself anymore. "I told you, he really doesn't need medicine." Faith impatiently interrupted me. There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. Then I heard the rustling sound of someone getting out of bed. "Sister, my head hurts so much, I'm glad you're here." Ethan's voice came through the phone, soft in a way I had never heard before. Like a little kitten, he was being affectionate with his favorite owner. Faith chuckled softly, speaking to him like a child. "I made your favorite egg noodles, they're still warm. Go eat some so you don't give me a stomachache." Ethan, who never eats late-night snacks, obediently agreed. He said, "The noodles that sister made are the best thing I've ever eaten." His voice faded as he walked away, and I heard a door close. Faith spoke again, "Did you hear that? As long as I'm by his side, I can soothe him without needing medicine. Nora, that's something you'll never be able to achieve, no matter how hard you try." I looked at my phone, wanting to argue, to tell her it wasn't like that. But in the end, I found myself unable to say anything because that was the truth. In the words of a novel, Ethan was the product of an unwanted union. He didn't want the marriage, but he couldn't withstand his parents' threats of death and eventually married that powerful man. Later, she gave birth to Ethan. But that woman, with a free-spirited soul, could never accept Ethan's father. She fell into a deep depression and passed away in a few short years. Ethan's father, devastated by this, became extremely paranoid. His love turned into hatred for the child of the woman he loved most, all because Ethan resembled her in a way she despised. The early death of a beloved figure always lingers in one's memory. That man not only hated himself but also despised Ethan. In his extreme paranoia, he sent the young Ethan to an orphanage, planning to let him fend for himself. Ethan grew up stumbling along, surrounded by ill-intentioned people. With that man's orders, everyone bullied him, forcing him to become a gloomy boy who only dared to hide in the shadows and lick his wounds alone. Faith appeared during that time, but no one knew where she came from. I only learned a little from the conversations among others. Faith once told Ethan that she came only for him, to save him. After that, they resembled the male and female leads in a novel about redemption. Ethan was no longer self-abased and gloomy, he was led by Faith and slowly stepped into the sunlight. The boy achieved great success. But Faith, who had always been by his side, left behind a letter and then disappeared without a trace. Ethan fell into despair for several years. He traveled around the world but could never find Faith, as if she had evaporated or had never existed at all. Eventually, Ethan gave up searching. Following the letter's instructions, he began to live well, striving to make his life fulfilling and happy. Later, I met him at a cocktail party. The moment he saw me, he said my eyes were beautiful, just like the stars in the sky. We got to know each other and fell in love. On countless nights Ethan would hold me close, whispering his love for me. During those moments I would look into his eyes, wanting to know if he truly loved me. Was it because of the family alliance, or was it simply because I was me? He told me, Ethan loves Nora, without any regard for status or conditions. Ethan was truly wonderful. He almost never argued with me, and the things I wanted would often appear in front of me within days. If I expressed unhappiness, he would drop all his work and take me on trips around the world. Aside from his bipolar disorder, Ethan was nearly perfect, but he was a good person. Even with this illness, he never harmed anyone. He even resorted to self-harm to keep himself grounded and avoid hurting others. Many times, when he curled up on the couch in pain during an episode, he would tell me to stay away so that I wouldn't get hurt. When I was unhappy, Ethan would be there for me. So, when he was suffering, I had to be there for him too. I would hold him, give him his medication, and stay with him through countless difficult nights. Sometimes, when his condition worsened and he lost all awareness, he would grab my arm and leave a bruise. When he regained consciousness, his eyes would be filled with guilt and self-reproach. He would hug me tightly, softly saying sorry, then gently apply medicine to my wounds. The next time he had an episode, he would do his utmost to control himself, even if it meant hurting himself, to ensure he wouldn't harm me. I thought our relationship was reciprocal, which is why I accepted his proposal. I truly wanted to spend my life with him. Then, that day came when Faith returned. That bright woman, as radiant as a little sun, looked exactly as she did in the photos. The years hadn't left any marks of aging on her face, she remained as vibrant as ever. Ignoring that Ethan was still on his knees proposing to me, she rushed over, pushed me aside, and embraced him. She said, "My Ethan has finally become the best version of himself." It was that day Ethan introduced her to me, saying she was his sister. Even without a blood relation, she deserved a lifetime of respect and love. Then, there was the party. I couldn't go because my period had come, and I was feeling unwell. Just before I was about to sleep, Faith, who had just added me as a friend, sent me a video. In the video, Ethan was drunk, leaning against her like an abandoned kitten, clinging to her neck. His voice was a soft murmur, calling her sister, revealing a vulnerability I had never seen before. "He marries you for the family alliance. He loves me because we have faced life and death together. So what do you have to compete with me?" It was only at that moment that I realized her appearance was meant to compete for him. The next morning, Ethan returned to our home. As soon as he appeared, he reached out to wrap his arms around my waist, burying his head in my neck, and pitifully said, "Nora, I had an episode last night. I didn't mean to stand you up." I didn't move, having not slept all night. I was a bit slow to react. Ethan seemed oblivious. He took my hand and led me to the couch in the living room, leaning down to kiss the corner of my eye. "I know I messed up, so I specially took the day off to take you to see wedding dresses." His words didn't carry a hint of guilt. I could feel his immense love for me at that moment. I wanted to ask him something, like, "Where did you sleep last night?" Or, "She came back, she wants to be with you, would you agree?" But in the end, I couldn't ask anything. Just then, his special ringtone rang, and Ethan, who was about to take me out, froze in place, pulled out his phone, and immediately answered. I couldn't hear what the person on the other end was saying, but I could see Ethan's face change to one of urgency in an instant. Don't worry, I'll be right there. Just stay put, okay? I stood up and walked over to him. What happened? After hanging up the phone, Ethan turned to look at me, his eyes openly filled with anxiety. He hurriedly spoke, Faith fell and seems to have sprained her ankle. I need to get to her place and take her to the hospital. I was stunned, my mouth reacted faster than my brain. Her place is 300 meters from the hospital. By the time you go find her and take her to the hospital, calling an ambulance would be quicker. After all, the distance from my home to Faith's apartment was smooth sailing, driving would take nearly 2 hours. But Ethan shook his head, speaking as he walked outside, you don't understand, she's a delicate girl. If I'm not by her side right now, she'll just cry. I have to go check on her. By the end of his sentence, he had already left the apartment without looking back. At that moment, a WeChat notification pinged. Faith sent me a message, saying, our relationship is such that even if you and Ethan are getting married, he would drop you to come see me at the sound of my call. Nora, have some dignity and leave on your own. Seeing the text, I felt indignant, a competitive spirit igniting deep within me. Without even changing into proper shoes, I grabbed my phone and ran through the community to stop Ethan, who was heading outside. Although Faith had retracted her message, I had taken a screenshot of our conversation beforehand and handed it directly to Ethan. Ethan, you can't have both, you should have made a decision long ago. He wasn't foolish, in fact, he was quite smart. Seeing that message and hearing my words, there was no way he wouldn't understand what it meant. Ethan looked down at his phone, his handsome brows furrowing slightly. After a long silence, he raised his head to look at me. Nora, she is more important to me than family. She may be a bit extreme, but I hope you can be understanding of her little temper, just for my sake, okay? His words were laced with an undeniable tenderness, and he even tried to reach out to gently stroke my face. I shook my head, stepping back step by step. Perhaps he didn't expect that even in choosing between two options, he would still choose to be non-committal. I looked at him, this boy I truly liked, and suddenly felt utterly disappointed. I realized that my relationship with him had come to an end. I napped at home for the entire afternoon. When I woke up, the night view outside was splendid, but the room remained as silent as ever. I opened my phone, and our shared circle of friends informed me that Faith's so-called ankle sprain was nothing, and they had spent the entire day having fun outside. I opened and closed photo after photo that had been meticulously arranged to be presented to me. I was almost self-harming, trying to let go completely. Just as I was about to open the last photo, my phone rang. It was a salesperson I had added earlier. Miss Nora, the dress you ordered from our store has arrived. Would you like it delivered, or would you prefer to pick it up yourself? The mention of the dress made me momentarily dizzy. Suddenly, I recalled a few months ago when Ethan and I stayed in a nice guest house on the mountain in the neighboring city for a few days, hoping to breathe fresh air and ease his condition. The mountain flowers were blooming, and the vibrant spring scenery was always particularly beautiful. During our stay, I bought an easel, wanting to dabble in art. I spent days fixated on the mountains, flowers, and painting, ultimately creating several beautiful landscape paintings. Later, he said, these paintings are memories we can preserve. I asked him how to preserve them. He initially smiled and said nothing, but later, he designed a dress for me from that brand I had always loved, using the color patterns from my favorite painting on it. I waited several months for this dress, and now it had finally been completed. Unfortunately, thinking of the situation between Ethan and me, it felt increasingly ironic. But I still planned to pick up that dress myself. There was no other reason, it was simply because the painting on that dress was mine. After hanging up, I changed my clothes and set off. The mall was a bit far from my home, and it took me nearly an hour to get there. Just as I was about to enter the store, I spotted Ethan from a distance. Why is he here? I froze for a moment, wondering to myself. Suddenly, I remembered that he had also left his contact information, so he should have been notified too. Considering he had been with Faith all day, I felt a twinge of coolness in my heart, but the dress was mine, so I took a deep breath and walked forward. As soon as I stepped into the store, I was greeted by Faith pulling aside the fitting room curtain, wearing the dress that was supposed to be mine. Seeing me, Faith smiled provocatively and walked right up to Ethan, who was facing away from me. She even twirled in the skirt, saying, "Ethan, does it look good?" Ethan nodded, his voice gentle as he replied, "It looks great, especially good." The salesperson nearby, unaware of the situation, quickly chimed in, "Yes, it looks fantastic on you. Your boyfriend has great taste." Hearing the salesperson's words, Faith's smile became even brighter, and she shot me another incredibly provocative glance. The salesperson who had been attending to me now noticed me standing at the door, his expression awkward as he greeted me, "Miss Nora, you're here. I just went to the back to get something. Didn't expect this to happen." As I listened to the salesperson, Ethan suddenly turned his head, his gaze filled with panic as he saw me. He jumped up from the sofa, striding towards me. "Nora, it's not what you think. It's just a dress fitting." "Nora, do you really need to be so petty?" Faith directly interrupted him, her gaze fixed on me with a hint of mockery as she noticed Ethan's furrowed brows. She quickly changed her demeanor, reining in her provocative edge, and walked over to me with a harmless smile. "Oh, we were just joking. When Ethan and I were playing at the beach, he suddenly got a call saying your dress had arrived. I was afraid you wouldn't like it. The two of us are similarly built, so I suggested trying it on for you, and it turned out to fit perfectly." She dragged out the last sentence intentionally. Ethan nodded in agreement. "Yes, Nora. Don't overthink it. She just meant well and wanted to try on the dress for you, nothing more." Looking at the two of them, each playing off the other, I couldn't help but laugh. "Try it on for me?" Ethan nodded, wanting to reach out and hold my hand, but I tried to dodge him first. His expression became awkward. Especially after a number of curious eyes gathered around, he steeled himself and walked towards me, speaking in a low voice, "Nora, don't throw a tantrum, it's just a dress." "Yeah, just a dress." I suddenly raised my voice, making those who were already eavesdropping on the gossip perk up even more. "Sister, how nice of you to help me try on a dress." I walked up to Faith with a smile, showing her a harmless demeanor. She forced a smile. "I just had some time, it's only a favor, and I'm more than happy to help." Hearing this, I nodded. "I can tell that you are truly eager to help, sister. It's just a dress now, but when I get married, will you also help me try on my groom? Sound good?" "Nora!" Ethan suddenly shouted, rushing forward to grab my wrist. I shook off his hand and looked at Ethan again. "And you must be happy to let your sister try it on in advance, right?" Everyone was an adult. Some things didn't need to be said clearly, just a few words were enough to piece together a melodramatic story. At this moment, the curious staff and passers-by all widened their eyes, some had their mouths open in shock, and a few even discreetly took out their phones. Faith appeared to be deeply aggrieved. "Nora, do you really need to say that? I was just kindly trying on the dress for you. If you're unhappy, just tell me, and I'll take it off." With that, she wiped away tears as she turned to the fitting room to change. In no time, she came back dressed differently, throwing the skirt directly onto me. "Here you go, it's just a dress." "Yes, just a dress." I turned to the salesperson. "Do you have scissors in the store?" She nodded and quickly handed them to me. Then, under the puzzled gazes of everyone, I cut the dress to shreds. "Nora, what are you doing?" Ethan didn't understand and tried to stop me, but it was too late. I looked at the pile of fabric scraps in front of me and suddenly felt a sense of relief. With that cut, it wasn't just the dress that was ruined, it was all the love and time from these years. If my things have been touched by someone else, then I don't want them anymore. Just like this dress. Although Faith looked furious, she still forced a sympathetic expression and tugged at Ethan's sleeve. "A dress this expensive, and you just cut it up without a second thought? How careless." I blandly tossed the scraps onto her. "I can't help it, I'm just wealthy." Ever since she showed up, Ethan seemed to be trying to make up for lost time. As Faith was caught off guard by my words and was about to say something else, a commotion suddenly erupted outside the store. Then, a bloodied man came limping towards us, shouting, "Someone's been killed." The panic was sudden and overwhelming. After that person shouted the first warning, everyone inside and outside the store began to stir. Many people grabbed their children or held on to their friends and loved ones, frantically running forward, shouting, "Someone's been killed! Someone's been killed!" In short, the entire mall descended into chaos in an instant. A tall man running past us shouted into the store, "Quick, run that way and find somewhere to hide. There's a lunatic with a knife stabbing people, and he's coming this way." As he spoke, the staff quickly rushed outside. I also lost the will to continue arguing with Faith, and in such a tense atmosphere, I followed everyone outside. However, the storefront was quite large. By the time we reached the entrance, we could see that man waving two knives around violently. Some people just happened to cross his path. With one swift motion, blood sprayed everywhere. He was surprisingly quick. As if he had spotted our group, he grinned and ran straight toward us, brandishing the knives, terrifying those around him. One salesperson, seemingly terrified, accidentally shoved me while trying to escape, and I collided with a nearby door. At that moment, my slender high heels felt like a burden. I fell heavily to the ground. Nora, Ethan, who was right behind me, rushed over, trying to help me up, especially since that man was coming at us with a knife. But just as Ethan reached down to help me, Faith, who hadn't yet made it out of the store, suddenly fell to the ground, clutching her ankle and crying out, "Ethan, I twisted my ankle." Her scream caused Ethan, who had just reached for me, to withdraw his hand and dash toward her. At the same time, I struggled to get up from the ground, but the man with the knife was wildly waving his weapon and had already reached me. It was my first time being so close to death. The knife was raised high, aimed directly at my head, just a press away from plunging into my skull. In that moment of impending death, my legs felt uncontrollable, and I forgot the most basic instinct to flee. I even hopelessly closed my eyes. Then, with a loud thud, I heard the sound of the knife hitting the ground. At the same time, a sharp pain shot through my arm. I opened my eyes in a panic and saw several security guards and police officers rushing over, pinning that man to the ground. The knife in his left hand fell to the floor. But before the knife in his right hand could be knocked away, it had already sliced across my arm, leaving a deep wound. Nora. Ethan seemed to finally react. He let go of Faith in his arms and hurried over to me, looking at the wound on my arm. Bright red blood trickled down my arm, drop by drop, falling to the ground. "Are you okay?" "I'm sorry I couldn't protect you. I'm so sorry." As Ethan looked at the wound, his eyes grew redder, and by the end, there was a hint of a sob in his voice. Meanwhile, a passerby who had witnessed the whole scene couldn't help but sneer, "You didn't protect her, did you? At a critical moment, you turned around to protect your mistress, and now you're crying? What are you crying about?" That your false emotions had been exposed, the bloody truth was easily revealed by the bystander. I couldn't help but smile derisively. "Ethan, why bother?" He had turned around so decisively before, not showing the slightest hesitation. And now he was crying in front of me? I couldn't help but close my eyes and pushed him away forcefully. "This time, it's over for us." Over. The news of the indiscriminate attack by the mental patient at the mall quickly became trending. After I was sent to the hospital, the wound was so deep that it needed 7 stitches. While the doctor was stitching me up, there was a hint of sympathy in her eyes. She said, "Don't worry, I'll make the stitches look nice." I thanked her, still able to feel the pain of the stitching. The doctor sighed, "At the moment of life and death, it's the easiest time to see a person's true colors. You're still young, just consider it a misjudgment. You will definitely meet someone better in the future." As she spoke, I glanced at Ethan, who had just pushed open the door. I nodded in agreement. "Yes, I see it clearly now." When Ethan entered, the doctor's expression turned unpleasant. I guessed she was held back by her professional ethics. Otherwise, the phone screen, which hadn't fully turned off, was still playing videos of the incident in the mall, enough for her to roll her eyes at Ethan. "I'm sorry." "Nora, I didn't expect it to turn out like this. Ethan stood in front of me, his eyes filled with guilt and self-blame. He even pulled out a knife, holding the handle toward me. If you're really angry, then stab me twice, until you feel better, okay? This simple and brutal way to vent anger. To be honest, I really wanted to take that knife and stab it into his arm twice. But I couldn't. This was a hospital, and the door was still wide open. Even if he didn't pursue it, I would still be considered as intentionally harming someone, which wasn't worth it. Seeing that I ignored him, Ethan half squatted on the ground, looking up at me. Nora, I told you. I met Faith when I was 16. If it weren't for her help, I might still be stuck in the mud, unable to see the future, directionless, truly lost, no different from a homeless person on the street. He paused, as if recalling something, and then took out a piece of jade from his pocket. Although he called it a piece, it looked more like half a piece. I stared at the jade, feeling oddly familiar, but couldn't recall why at that moment. However, Ethan didn't notice my strange reaction and continued reminiscing. He deliberately found someone to beat me up and plotted against me. I had originally thought of living well and even wanted to start a small business. But he set me up and made me lose a lot of money. I have no money. This so-called biological father, who shares my blood, just wanted to push me to death, forcing me to go and atone for that woman. I really didn't want to live. I wanted to jump into the river. But that day, a car stopped beside me, and the girl inside handed me this piece of jade, saying that selling it could get a lot of money, and with money, life wouldn't be so hard. She also said to hold on a little longer. If it was really unbearable, then just let it go. That evening, half the sky was red, and the sunset clouds were beautiful, some light reflected on that girl's face. Although I couldn't see it clearly through the car window, I thought it was she who had given me a new life. When he reached this point in his story, my heart suddenly skipped a beat. Looking at that piece of jade, I now understood more. No wonder it felt so familiar. However, as I listened to his words, it seemed I had another suspicion. Ethan, the girl you mentioned, is it Faith? He nodded, holding the jade carefully to his chest, looking particularly precious. I didn't sell this piece of jade. I gritted my teeth and persevered. When I got through the toughest times, I found Faith by my side, always quietly helping me. Someone like me, under that man's deliberate guidance, everyone avoided me like the plague. Only Faith stayed by my side. She said that giving me this piece of jade was to hope that I could live well. Hearing this, I suddenly smiled. No wonder. I stared at the jade with a complex expression. Ethan, have you ever thought that actually giving me the jade? Ethan. Before I could finish my sentence, Faith barged in through the door. This time, she didn't lie. Her ankle was wrapped in bandages, clearly injured, and she limped as she entered. Seeing her come in, Ethan, who had originally wanted to continue telling his story, immediately stood up and helped her. Why aren't you resting properly in the ward? Faith was about to speak when she caught sight of the piece of jade in his hand, and her expression momentarily panicked. Then she exclaimed, "Ouch!" Half of her body fell into Ethan's embrace, her eyes reddening as she said, "Ethan, I'm still in pain, can you stay with me?" This time, it was Faith's turn not to be interrupted. My usually fierce and swift sister, Scarlett, kicked open the door and didn't forget to say to the doctor beside her, "I broke it. I'll compensate later, but let me handle my family matters first, thank you." After saying that, she walked straight up to Faith. With a fierce look, she said, "Faith, are you addicted to pretending to be a victim? What kind of tea talk are you doing here?" As soon as Scarlett appeared, the Faith who had just tried to act weak was mercilessly exposed for her true nature. Her face showed a moment of discomfort, but she still mustered the courage to retort, "This is our business. Who are you to meddle? I'm your grandmother." Scarlett rolled up her sleeves, reached out, and yanked Faith's hair, watching her wince in pain, then tugged a couple more times. "Ethan, help me." Faith couldn't possibly match Scarlett's strength. So her desperate struggles only resulted in more hair being pulled out, causing her to cry out for Ethan's help in the end. "Scarlett, let go." Ethan quickly reached out to shield Faith and reprimanded her softly. Scarlett rolled her eyes at him, clenched her fist, and punched him right in the face. "You think you're so special? Not only are you bullying my sister, but you're also protecting this pathetic green TB*TCH in front of her. Do you really think I wouldn't dare to hit you? Humph, you scumbag. While speaking, Scarlett didn't stop her actions. Ethan didn't retaliate, he just awkwardly dodged, still protecting Faith in his arms. So in the end, both of them were shoved out of the room, and the corridor was filled with onlookers, all watching the spectacle. I just sat in a chair. The anesthesia at the wound site had started to wear off gradually, and it was a bit painful. After finishing the fight, Scarlett turned back into the room, not forgetting to close the door behind her. She sat in front of me and said, "I've been telling you to learn Taekwondo with me, but you always expect me to protect you. But what about when I'm not around?" After saying that, she looked down at my arm injury, and finally couldn't help but sigh, "Forget it. Once you recover, I'll teach you how to fight. Don't rely on that scumbag for everything." No, at this point, don't tell me you still want to marry him? I shook my head. How could I still want to marry him? I have to break up with him. Even if I was love-struck, at this moment, looking at the injury on my arm, there was really no hesitation. Hearing my answer, Scarlett nodded with rare satisfaction. When she was about to say something else, she suddenly pointed at the closed door. By the way, when I was hitting Ethan, I saw him holding a piece of jade that looked familiar. What's going on? As she spoke, she took the jade pendant hanging around her neck. It matched Ethan's exactly. I told you, they're identical. How is this possible? Scarlett looked at me with a hint of confusion in her eyes. I sighed and began to explain, when we were 15, didn't we go on a trip and bought this pair of jade? You got one, and I got one. Then, on the way home, we encountered someone planning to jump into the river. Judging by his clothes, we guessed he might have gone through something. That day, I didn't have any money, so after asking for your consent, I gave him my jade to exchange for money to live well. At least I wanted to give him a chance at life. At this point, Scarlett had completely grasped the situation. So the person you saved back then was Ethan? I laughed. But he always thought the girl who saved him was Faith. Since my arm was only injured and didn't require hospitalization, I went home that afternoon. Scarlett accompanied me, and she gave Ethan another good beating when he tried to get close to me unilaterally. After suffering setbacks in love, I needed to work harder. After resting at home for 2 days, the company's new product was about to be launched. As the project leader, I naturally had to appear at the launch event. According to the procedure, after introducing the product, people began to ask me questions. Most of them were inquiries about the various functionalities of the product. Some were even more enthusiastic about gossip, especially the gossip from the Beijing circle. So one girl, whom I called on, boldly asked, "Miss Nora, it's said that your family and Ethan's family have a marriage alliance, but given the recent events, will the wedding date remain unchanged?" As soon as she spoke, the audience erupted in a commotion. My assistant next to me was about to take me downstairs. But I shook my head at her, planning to announce this matter today. As you can see, Ethan and I indeed have some issues in our relationship. But who is right and who is wrong, as evidenced by the videos online, is clear to everyone. Since Ethan has someone else he loves, I can't force it. As for the marriage contract, it is hereby annulled. Hearing my words, the girl excitedly pressed further, "So, the marriage contract is cancelled?" "Yes, it's cancelled." As I watched the replay of the video in my office, Scarlett was beside me, looking at the stock prices of the corporate group. Seeing that there were no issues, she finally breathed a sigh of relief. Luckily, the videos online are clear enough. It's Ethan who made the mistake, not you. The marriage between our families was originally for better cooperation. But the videos online were sufficient to prove that he was at fault. Therefore, I propose to annul the marriage, and the party affected should be Ethan's family. However, with the release of this video, combined with previous short videos taken in the mall and hospital, the discussion online was heating up significantly. While Scarlett and I were watching the online discussions, there was suddenly a commotion outside the office, and then the door was pushed open as Ethan rushed in. My assistant looked apologetically at me. I couldn't stop Ethan. I shook my head at her and then looked at Ethan, who had no expression on his face. No appointment, bursting into my office. Do you want to tear our family apart? It's fine that the marriage didn't happen. But tearing apart means the collaboration between our families is over. This is more important than our personal feelings. The benefits brought by our work matter more. Ethan didn't respond to me and took a few more steps forward. He leaned over the desk with both hands, looking at me. Nora, I understand you're upset. But isn't annulling the marriage a bit childish? Childish? I scoffed, my gaze falling on my arm still wrapped in bandages, feeling increasingly cold inside. We never officially announced our intention to marry, it was an unspoken agreement. Therefore, a unilateral notification is sufficient to annul the contract. After all, cheating can be unilaterally done. Ethan, in a panic, tried to grab my hand, but I shook him off. Nora, how long are you going to throw a tantrum? We've been together for so many years, and everyone in the industry knows we're getting married. This is also an unspoken agreement. How can you just say it's cancelled? As for Faith, I've explained to you, she saved my life. So I promised her that no matter what danger I encounter in the future, I must protect her first. I really don't know what to do about the two of you. Upon hearing this, I couldn't help but slap the table hard. But Ethan, you also promised me you would never make me a choice. A promise is a very serious matter. It's never just a casual statement followed by swearing an oath with no follow-up. A promise made must be fulfilled. Otherwise, one day, it will come back to bite you, and there will be no good ending. Just as Ethan and I faced each other in silence, there was another commotion outside the office. Faith rushed in, her eyes red as she looked at me. Nora, do you really have to make such a scene? Ethan and I supported each other in our youth. We made a promise to never betray each other in this lifetime. I know you have feelings for each other now. I'm not forcing anything. I just want to quietly stay by your side. Suddenly, Scarlett burst into laughter. She opened the door wide and leaned against the doorframe, sneering. What do you want to quietly stay by their side for? To be the mistress, you? Faith turned to look at her, seemingly wanting to curse, but she bit her tongue. What did I say wrong? If you hadn't left back then, no one would have said anything about you and Ethan being together. Ethan and I are not that kind of relationship, Ethan tried to explain. You shut up. Scarlett suddenly interjected, then took a couple of steps forward, continuing to glare at Faith. But you left anyway. It wasn't due to any difficult circumstances, and you didn't even have a reason, you just left. It was only a few years after you left that Nora met Ethan and fell in love. She didn't steal you away, they dated step by step and were preparing to marry. Then you suddenly popped up from who knows where. And when you appeared, you were all teary-eyed, adding that pitiful act. Only a blind person wouldn't see through your little tricks. She paused, turning her gaze to Ethan. That's right, I'm talking about you. Faith's face turned ugly, and she glared at Scarlett, nearly shouting, you BTCH, what do you know? What right do you have to point fingers at my situation? BTCH. B*TCH. Seemingly very angry, she could hardly contain herself and charged toward Scarlett. If it were just that simple, I wouldn't worry. Because Scarlett had learned boxing and was a black belt in Taekwondo, she was quite formidable. But it just so happened that the sun was shining high. The sunlight streaming in cast a reflection on Faith's sleeve, and I noticed she had hidden a small fruit knife in her sleeve, something she had concealed all along that no one except me had discovered. Scarlett would definitely teach her a lesson, but she wouldn't think that Faith had a knife hidden. So it was very likely that someone could get hurt. Thinking of this, I rushed over as Faith was about to reach for something. I grabbed her ponytail. Faith was caught off guard. I pulled her hair with all my might, yanking her back harshly. She leaned backward, and due to the force, her right hand swung against the desk, knocking the picture frame I had placed there to the ground. As for Faith, she fell to the ground, and her fingers were cut by the shards, revealing a bit of blood. Faith! Ethan exclaimed, pushing me away without a second thought and reaching out to hug her. He was also quite forceful. With a swing of his hand, I fell to the ground, my palm pressed directly onto the shards of glass, pain shooting through me. But he didn't notice me. Instead, he was anxiously looking at Faith, his eyes filled with concern. Faith's eyes were red, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Ethan, if my appearance has caused you trouble, I can disappear like before. But I just can't bear to leave you. I pulled you out of the abyss with great difficulty, and I want to see you stay in the sunlight. I really don't have any bad intentions, really don't." At the end of her words, she burst into tears, and Ethan felt even more guilty. He even turned to me, his tone questioning. "Nora, is this really necessary? If I want Faith to stay by my side, even if you're angry at me, I wouldn't say a word. Even if you stabbed me with a knife, I wouldn't dodge. So why do you have to hurt Faith? Why hurt her? I told you before, she saved my life. I wouldn't have jumped off that bridge if it weren't for her. I owe her." Owe her? In contrast to Ethan's hysteria, Scarlett was much calmer. She helped me up from the ground, staring coldly at Ethan, then took off the jade pendant around her neck and smashed it down on him. "Ethan, if the favor you keep thinking about is the little girl who gave you this jade back then I just want to say one thing, your eyes are truly blind." Ethan, who had been incredibly furious, froze in place when he saw the jade. Then he took out another piece from his pocket. The two pieces of jade were originally a pair, only together could they form a complete piece. The bite marks on them were undeniable. A hint of confusion flashed in Ethan's eyes, but he quickly reacted, grabbing Scarlett's sleeve, panicking. "What do you mean by that? Why do you have a piece too? Why are these two a pair?" Scarlett glanced at me as she took the piece that should have been mine. "Actually, if you had looked closely, you would have found that there is a not-so-smooth dent on this piece, shaped like an S. Mine is shaped like a Y. So, do you understand?" Understand. The so-called favor he kept thinking about, he had even found the wrong benefactor. I stood up, looking at Ethan, who was panicking and breaking down, and couldn't help but close my eyes. If I had known everything that would happen in the future, maybe the me back then wouldn't have reached out for help. I wasn't that kind-hearted. Why shouldn't the people who hurt me suffer? Scarlett and I returned to my home. After my parents and brother learned about what happened in the office today, they immediately got furious and called the Ethan family. Not only did they formally notify them of the annulment of the engagement, but various future collaborations were also likely to be paused. Our Nora family's cooperation isn't only with the Ethan family. They bullied my precious daughter, and I won't let him off the hook. After my dad said this, my brother nodded in agreement. "Nora, he's not worth it. If you're not satisfied, I can go beat him up for you, how about that?" Scarlett waved her fists. "I can help too." Looking at my family and friends, I suddenly felt a wave of warmth in my eyes. Besides that not-so-worth-it lover, I actually have so much love and so much tolerance. I looked at my parents and brother, tears falling uncontrollably, and then told them. "After this incident, I've grown up a bit. So, I want to go abroad for a few years to manage the overseas branch for the family." It was both a training experience and a way to change my mood. After all, it was somewhat affecting my mood to have someone I didn't want to see around every day. My parents and brother understood this reasoning, so they didn't think to refuse. After all, it's still the family business. Even if I went abroad, flights were convenient, and we could meet anytime. Scarlett, listening to me, immediately said, "It's not safe abroad, I'll go with you." I glanced at my brother beside me. His attention was completely on Scarlett, not shifting at all. Childhood sweethearts, both interested in each other. If I agreed to that, it would be a bit too oblivious. So I shook my head at her. "We agreed that this is about growth. I can't always rely on your protection. If you miss me, you can always fly abroad to find me. I'd be more than happy." The flight to abroad was already booked. I was packing my things in my room, and Scarlett was sitting beside me, keeping me company. It was raining today. The sound of the rain pattering outside made me feel a bit uneasy and stuffy. Suddenly, Scarlett's phone rang. After answering, she took her phone to the balcony and turned back to look at me. "Nora, he's here, no need to say too clearly, I know who he is. Scarlett continued, your brother said he has been standing at the door for a while. He originally didn't want to disturb you, but he's been there for several hours now, and his expression doesn't seem quite right. Upon hearing that, my hands paused as I folded the clothes. After thinking for a moment, I took the umbrella from the corner of the room and went downstairs out of the yard. I opened the umbrella and walked out of the yard, only to see Ethan standing outside the door. His face didn't look good. Extremely pale, his brows tightly knitted, as if he were trying to endure something. So I sighed, what's the point? Ethan looked at me, his eyes red, but I couldn't tell if he had been crying. After all, the rain was quite heavy today, and he hadn't brought an umbrella, getting drenched from head to toe, making it hard to discern any tears on his face. He wanted to reach out to touch me, but seeing me take a step back, his hand froze in midair. Nora. I stepped out to see him, not to get entangled with him again. I just wanted to tell him that since he knew his body was different from others, that he couldn't control himself and could potentially hurt someone, he shouldn't stand at my door. I was afraid he might hurt my family. I knew that what I said sounded hurtful, but we had already broken up. And not in a dignified manner. He had caused me quite a bit of embarrassment, so I was throwing a few jabs back at him, a kind of tit for tat. Ethan lowered his gaze and stood for a long time. Then he timidly looked at me, like a little cat or dog that had been abandoned, cautiously speaking, Nora, do you really not want me anymore? Weren't you the one who was entangled with another woman first? Who would want a boyfriend who constantly protects another woman? Hearing my words, a flash of hurt crossed his eyes. I didn't know you were that girl from back then, which is why I treated her well. I wanted to make amends. I didn't know, but whether I knew or not, I have always loved you, that has never changed. I laughed. It's not just physical infidelity that counts as cheating. It was about the time I needed him. He looked at the person he couldn't let go of, ultimately letting go of my hand to choose to protect her. That alone was already a betrayal. No reason was needed. He shook his head. If I had known that girl was you, I definitely wouldn't have acted this way. If that's what you think, then I can only feel disappointed in you. I interrupted him, looking at the man I had loved for so many years, feeling even more disappointed. If you always remember the feelings you had with Faith during those years, walking in the sunlight together, then when she returned, you chose her. Even though I still want to scold you, I might be able to let go of this relationship with some acceptance. After all, it's about redemption. In the world of novels, she redeemed you, and you fell in love with her, that's understandable. As for me, the substitute before the white moonlight returned? But no matter what, just because she gave you that piece of jade back then, you can close your eyes and, in the name of some so-called favor, let unrelated people get hurt and then say it's unavoidable and that I should understand you. Then I just want to say one thing, who the hell do you think you are? Do I owe you anything? The favor you owe is yours alone, why do you want to sacrifice others to repay it? It's insane. Because of a piece of jade, you can treat others well unconditionally. And you can also treat another person well unconditionally just because you've got the wrong one. I found it utterly ridiculous. Ridiculous enough that I was genuinely disappointed in him. In the end, I looked at Ethan and softly said, why make this so awkward? We're all adults here. Can't we leave each other with a bit of dignity? Tearing the fabric of our relationship and destroying the last bit of space for us, was it really necessary? After all, within this circle, besides my relationship with him, there was also the partnership between our companies. I went abroad and successfully took over the overseas branch. At first, it wasn't very smooth. These past few years, I had lived too well under the protection of my parents and brother. Whenever someone bullied me, Scarlett was the first to raise her fists to protect me, not allowing me to be harmed in the slightest. But ultimately, people must grow up. I gritted my teeth, persisted, and humbly learned to gradually strengthen myself. As for the news from home, Scarlett would video chat with me every day, flying abroad several times a week, saying she was afraid I'd feel lonely. She told me many things. Your brother has been targeting Ethan's family a lot to take revenge for you. Originally, those people from Ethan's family were already problematic, now they've been provoked, and their whole company has turned into chaos. And Ethan, that reckless one, he already had bipolar disorder. He was cooperating with treatment before, but now it seems he's punishing himself, not taking his medication or receiving treatment, making his condition worse and worse is basically a mental case. By the way, you remember that woman, Faith, right? At first, she even tried to find Ethan. She said that she didn't think much of Ethan at all, calling him a complete delinquent. Just the thought of saving him made her feel nauseous. Later, she didn't give up. When Ethan temporarily recovered, she went to find him again, but he wouldn't see her at all. She said that she didn't think much of Ethan at all, calling him a complete delinquent. Just the thought of saving him made her. She said that she didn't think much of Ethan at all, calling him a complete delinquent. Just the thought of saving him made her feel nauseous. If it weren't for her mission requirements, she wouldn't have stayed by his side. She also said that after leaving that year, she should have received a lot of money, but later found out that Ethan didn't love her at all, or rather, that he didn't love her at all and could only return in disgrace, trying to use their past feelings to wedge herself into your life. Overall, it was all rumors, and in the end, both of them were sent to a mental hospital. By the end, Scarlett couldn't help but sigh, but I didn't say anything. I just looked at the sun outside the window. The sun was shining brightly, and everything was a new beginning.